my name is Lauren and welcome to the Theoretical YouTube channel, the only YouTube channel that ever talks about Pixar movies. Everyone else is a bot. Anyway, Luca premiered on Disney Plus a few weeks ago, and it was alright. Not my favorite Pixar film, not something I'm planning on watching over and over again, but pretty decent, and it made me laugh quite a few times. But today I'm here to answer the question that has been on every Pixar fan's mind since the trailer first came out. How does Luca impact the Pixar theory? There are minor spoilers for every Pixar movie in this video, and lots of spoilers for Luca. You have been warned. If you don't know what the Pixar theory is, why are you watching this? Like, it was in the title of the video. But I guess it won't hurt to recap. The Pixar theory is a thought experiment first coined by a guy named John Negroni in 2013. The basic idea is that every film produced by Pixar Animation Studios exists on one massive timeline that spans thousands of years. The more nitty-gritty read also includes an intergenerational battle for control over Earth and maybe the cosmos between three factions: the humans, the animals, and the machines. But that is mostly irrelevant for today. What you do need to know is a basic rundown of the timeline and when each film takes place. When the Pixar theory was first published and started circulating the internet, the earliest film on the timeline was Brave, which takes place in medieval Scotland. This has since been replaced by The Good Dinosaur, which takes place millions of years ago when dinosaurs existed and animals ruled the earth. And then we get another significant time jump to 1960s America, where the Incredibles franchise takes place. This is a period of time when certain humans somehow became enhanced, possibly through secret military experiments, and gained superhuman abilities. But regardless of these powers, at this point in time, humans are also the faction with the most sentience and power. But they've begun to build machines with the ability to learn and adapt, and this will eventually directly lead to another shift in the status quo. Next up on the list is the spread of Pixar films that probably take place around the same time that they came out. Everything from the Toy Story movies to Ratatouille, Inside Out, and Finding Nemo. We've also got Up, Coco, and Soul. Again, probably. I guess you could say these films all take place in modern times compared to other installments like Brave and WALL-E. Speaking of WALL-E, that film gives us another time skip ahead that lands us firmly in the future, where with the help of the mega corporation, by and large, machines have risen up and taken over Earth. Or at least humans left for a while and machines became the de facto leaders. Supposedly, while the Axiom was out and about for a few centuries, sentient cars roamed the Earth. And then there's a major energy crisis that causes the entire civilization to fall by the time the events of WALL-E take place. After the humans return to Earth, agriculture starts again, allowing bugs to exist, leading to A Bug's Life. And then we have another massive time gap between the time the humans return to Earth and when they eventually evolve into the Monster Society from Monsters, Inc. Yeah, the Pixar theory argues that humans are the biological ancestors to the monsters, and that evolution took thousands of years. Hey, we've got to suspend our disbelief somewhere, and this is not the most far-fetched thing that's become popular with internet theory culture. Personally, it's kind of harder for me to believe that Boo eventually goes back in time and becomes the witch from Brave. Look, I see she carved a drawing of Sully and a sculpture of the Pizza Planet truck, but it feels like a stretch. And Onward, there's a couple popular theories about Onward. I personally don't think that anyone has exactly pinned down where it fits into all of this, but the collective consciousness of the internet isn't all that concerned about it. And remember, the Pixar theory is more of a thought experiment than a set-in-stone extended universe. There is no Kevin Feige equivalent keeping track of Pixar continuity. Sure, there's lots of Easter eggs, but in the end, it is one big game. No one's signing QED at the end of any of this. It is all conjecture and trying to connect the dots between the films. sounds. It's supposed to be fun. Anyway, Luca came out last week, and I'm pretty sure that these sea monsters are not related to the mermaids from Onward. So I guess we need to figure out when Luca takes place on the Pixar timeline and how it impacts the rest of the world. But the city of Porto Rosso on the Italian Riviera has never been featured in another Pixar film. Oh wait! There's that flyer for Porto Rosso featured in the film Soul, because almost every Pixar film has an Easter egg for the next one in terms of theatrical release order. But that doesn't necessarily mean that Luca and Soul take place in the same time period. After all, Hank the Septipus cameos in The Good Dinosaur, and he's not supposed to be 65 million years old. Sometimes an Easter egg is just an Easter egg. But at the very least, it is very likely that Joe could have visited this town that is obsessed with killing sea monsters. Maybe he could have even entered into the Porto Rosso Cup and won a Vespa, or at least bought one. Used. And I think this is one of the major hints we get as to when Luca is supposed to take place. At the very earliest, it has to be before the Picaggio company started specifically producing Vespas, which was in 1946, exactly 75 years ago. And Enrico Casarosa was born in 1971, which, if Luca is an exact analog to his life, would place Luca in the mid-1980s. But on the other hand, when they're building the first Vespa of the film, Alberto uses a photo of the Italian actor Marcello Mastroianni as a rearview mirror, who was famous in the 1950s into the 1960s. There are also some movie posters hanging in Porto Rosso Square when Luca and Alberto first enter the city, for the films Roman Holiday, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and La Strada, which all came out between the years 1953 and 1954. And if that's not enough for you, there's also a tweet released by Disney Animation Promos that featured a Japanese cover of a song from the film. After the song, there's a video of Enrico Casarosa telling us a little bit more about the film, and he specifically says that it's supposed to take place in the 1950s or 60s. Roughly. So that is the time period that we are going to be focusing on, which means that Luca is actually one of the earlier films on the Pixar timeline and takes place right around the same time as The Incredibles, which is interesting because this is also the time period where humans started to display superhuman abilities, like maybe turning into a sea monster when coming in contact with water. I guess this is sort of a chicken and an egg scenario here. Which came first in Luca's evolutionary cycle, the human form or the fish one? The fact that Luca and Alberto have tails would suggest that they evolved from fish, and the tails in Luca do behave like fish ones since they swish from side to side. There are some creatures who live underwater that aren't fish and do have tails, but their tails are structured differently. Dolphins and whales propel themselves forward by lifting their tails up and down, and there's actually a really interesting reason for this. They have hips. And the reason that dolphins have hips is because they actually descended from land animals who returned to the ocean. The reason their tails move up and down is because their hip joints originally moved two separate legs instead of one massive appendage. The other major clue that dolphins came from land is the fact that they breathe the air. However, even though the tails we see in Luca do behave more like a fish, we also know for certain that these creatures have hips. They're just still attached to their legs, which they don't seem to use at all. So, is it possible that these sea creatures are actually descended from humans who went into the water instead of the other way around? And honestly, this makes more sense than some type of fish developing human intelligence and the ability to walk as a bipedal creature. Because why do they have legs? Sure, Luca doesn't know how to walk at first, but he gets the hang of it pretty dang quick. He's riding a bike by the end of the film, and certainly better than me. Organs and body parts that a creature has but doesn't have a use for are referred to as vestigial organs, like the human appendix. Why do we have useless time bombs in our stomachs? The commonly accepted theory about why we still have these vestigial organs is that at some point in the very distant past, one of our ancestors, by which I mean a predecessor to humanity, developed these organs for some evolutionary purpose. But for whatever reason, they aren't an advantage anymore. But they aren't technically doing any harm, so there's no real evolutionary need for us to lose them. It's more common for an organism to develop useful body parts over time than to lose ones that aren't technically hindering them in any way. My point is that it is more likely that because they have legs, these sea monsters started on land and then moved into the water, which, since they resemble humans in every way, Luca and Alberto's ancestors probably were humans. So at what point did two humans decide that land sucked, I just want to live underwater and start a family? And then that family over time would develop into the underwater civilization that we see in Luca? And since we now know that this film takes place during the period of time when supers were being discovered on Earth, either from evolution or maybe some government meddling, it's at least worth looking into all of the superheroes that we know about and seeing if any looked like a sea monster or had underwater abilities. Well, no sea monsters, but as for underwater powers, Edna Mode designed a suit for a super named Splashdown, who was basically a parody of Aquaman and could fly. Splashdown's power set also included the ability to propel himself quickly through water, the ability to breathe underwater, and the ability to talk to underwater sea life. If this guy looked like a fish, I think we'd have a closed case here. But the other problem that prevents me from definitively saying that Splashdown is the human ancestor of the sea monsters from Luca is that he's dead. Right, I said Edna designed a suit for him. We know that because he was one of the examples of a cape mishap that ended in a tragic death.
No capes!
Specifically, his cape got caught in a vortex and he was sucked down underwater. So sad. Except, that doesn't make any sense. Sure, being sucked into a jet engine is probably going to kill you, or a freight elevator, or being shot into space. All deadly. But when your powers are specifically to breathe underwater and swim really, really well, why is this a death sentence for Splashdown? If you don't see what I'm getting at here, I'm pretty sure this guy faked his death. Maybe the pressure of being a superhero was too much and so he decided to disappear back underwater forever. From his NSA file, the National Super Agency, we know that Splashdown was obsessed with finding the lost city of Atlantis, meaning that he was interested in secret underwater societies. So maybe he found one and helped build it into what we see in Luca. But since there's not really any evidence that Atlantis is part of the Pixar universe, I would like to propose my own idea that maybe Splashdown created his own underwater society, and that the sea monsters we see in Luca are all descendants of him. That would mean that they are also descendants of humans and supers. But honestly, the timeline doesn't really work here. There is not enough time between Luca and the Incredibles for an entire species to develop from one guy. And while we do get extremely specific dates for some of the other cape mishaps,
April 23rd, 57. November 15th of 58.
we don't precisely know when Splashdown disappeared. But it would have been before or slightly after the lawsuits that caused supers to go into hiding, which was in 1947, which we know because Bob Parr reads this newspaper 15 years after the golden age of superheroes. And if Luca takes place in the 50s or even the 60s, that is just not enough time to develop a whole race of sea monsters. Unless these sea monsters are not descendants of Splashdown. Maybe he's a descendant of them. I think it's more likely that Splashdown was born as a sea monster who wanted to live on land, like Luca and Alberto and those two old women from Porto Rosso. When he came up to the surface, he was able to pass as a human, because he looks like a human when he's not wet. But because of his underwater abilities, he was mistaken as a super. So then he lived in the public eye as a superhero until one day he quit and faked his death, or tragically died like Edna said. Which leaves us with one final question. If they aren't descendants of Splashdown, where did these sea monsters come from? Well, I do have one other idea, but it is extremely far-fetched, and I love it. Earlier I mentioned that the monsters in Monsters, Inc. are just species that evolved from humans in the far distant future. And if you're following the Pixar theory, we also know that the doors in the movie are used to travel back in time to when humans were still around. And if you've seen Monsters, Inc., then you will also know that sometimes monsters are banished from the monster world by being pushed through a one-way door into the human realm. We even get a list of banished monsters that includes the Loch Ness Monster. I am not suggesting that the Loch Ness Monster is somehow related to the plot of Luca. My European geography is not that bad. But I do bring this up because it proves that there are water-based monsters. Okay, so with all of that groundwork laid, here is my extremely shaky grand theory of how Luca fits into the Pixar theory. Thousands of years from now, humans develop into the monsters we see in Monsters, Inc. One of these resembles the types of sea monsters we see in Luca, maybe even having the ability to appear human. And the fact that its biology, like legs, hips, and other human features, resemble humans so much is that they did evolve from humans, like all monsters. This monster gets banished from the monster world for some reason. Maybe it was because they had the ability to appear human, which scared everyone and caused a big public health crisis like the one we see Boo cause.
Red alert! Red alert! Red alert! Coming through, please. Stand aside.
But for whatever reason, they get banished and pushed through one of the doors and get deposited in Italy hundreds of years before the events of Luca. This sea monster adapts to their new life, starts a family, and that family grows into what we eventually see as an underwater civilization in Luca. In the 1940s, one of these sea monsters comes up from the water and decides to live as a superhero on land. And because of his underwater abilities, he's known as Splashdown. Okay, now bear with me for the next part here. Splashdown's obsession with living on land and human culture is something that he passed down onto his son, Alberto, who lives in this tower at the edge of town. Kinda like a superhero secret hideout. I did say this was a stretch. Anyway, Alberto's dad is now missing from his life. He would often go away for long stretches of time, perhaps because he was doing hero work in the United States.
You live up here?
Yeah, me and my dad. He's not even here a whole lot, so I pretty much just do whatever I want.
One day, he never came back. I'm just saying, looking at the timelines of both films, Alberto's father and Splashdown both disappeared roughly the same time.
Coincidence? I think not!
And that is how I think Luca fits into the Pixar theory. With a long, convoluted tale of time travel, superheroes, and horrible fathers. I may have been watching Loki too much. I honestly don't know if I believe in this theory, but it was really fun to make. Hello, if you enjoyed this theory, please feel free to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment in the section here. We would really appreciate to hear your thoughts and your feedback. Did you like Luca? What did you think? You can also follow us on Twitter at theory_central, the best Twitter account because it's the only one I have access to. You can also help support us on Patreon and join David W. as an incredible person who has excellent taste in YouTube channels. But those are my thoughts on Luca. So thanks for watching Silencio Bruno, and we'll see you later.
What's wrong with you, stupid?